Hello everybody, welcome to the Wrestling Guardians podcast. We've been away for a little while, but obviously with WrestleMania just around the corner, we thought it'd be a good time to get back on the podcast train, so to speak, and discuss some of the matches that are coming up. First of all, obviously we're still in the midst of this awful global pandemic, so hope everybody out there is still staying safe. And I know it kind of depends on which part of the world you're in at the moment, but in some places we're certainly seeing some kind of a light at the end of the tunnel. How are you doing in here? How's everything with you and where you are at the moment?
I'm doing okay, Dan. We're just starting to get the vaccines rolling out in Singapore, so hopefully things can get back to some sort of a new normal by the end of this year.
Yeah, hopefully. Same with us really. We're kind of on the way to sort of rolling out the vaccine program. It's going quite well so far, fingers crossed, but a lot remains to be seen, unfortunately. So yeah, just want to reiterate to everybody that I hope you are keeping safe out there. Speaking of obviously COVID and wrestling, I think the first point to note for me is that we're obviously a year removed from when the first wave really kind of started in earnest, and obviously WrestleMania was one of the big casualties of that. We had a very strange WrestleMania 36 show with no fans in attendance. This time around, I guess in a way, you could say thankfully they're back in stadium, the Raymond James Stadium in Tampa, and they're looking at getting fans back into the arenas. Apparently, according to Florida law, they've removed certain limits on how many people you can have in a sporting arena at one time. So we're looking at somewhere maybe around sort of 40,000 fans in attendance. So is that a big thing for you, Anir? Do you expect this show to just have a better feel to it now that there are likely to be fans in attendance?
Yeah, I definitely think so, and I think the fans are going to be very excited because they've been starved of big production wrestling in a live capacity in so long, and I think they're going to add quite a bit to this WrestleMania show. I think this WrestleMania has a little bit of WrestleMania 31 vibe to it, where people went in without particularly high expectations, but it ended up being a very enjoyable show. So I think this show has that kind of potential.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And I think because if you kind of look down the card, there are definitely some names that are missing that you would normally associate with WrestleManias of recent. So, likely, no Brock Lesnar, no Triple H, no Undertaker, obviously. So these sort of big marquee names, if you like, aren't there. But hopefully that might just give everybody else a bit of a chance to show what they can do. It might just lift that kind of glass ceiling, if you like, from their view. And this isn't a glory time for the wrestling industry as a whole, and WWE is certainly struggling in lots of places, but if they can come together and put on a good WrestleMania show, then I think that's kind of just what fans need at the moment. And I think it does help, unfortunately, that our expectations for the show probably aren't going to be that high either. So if it's a decent passable show, then I think most people will be happy with it, which isn't a great commentary on wrestling at the moment, but I think that's just where we are.
And and the place we're in, as a species, certainly plays no small part in that. So, so certainly, it's something that wrestling fans can look forward to, and pleasant surprise would be ideal.
I mean, I certainly haven't been following the products very closely at all recently, but it kind of doesn't really matter how low my interest is in wrestling in general. I think when WrestleMania is around the corner, I do still get that buzz of excitement. I mean, is it the same for you, do you think?
Oh, 100%. It's it's just this WrestleMania is sort of a Christmas for a wrestling fan, and no matter what the card is, I think we've all been conditioned to tune in at this stage of our lives.
Yeah, and I think one point I would want to make on that is that it doesn't really bode well for any kind of future wrestling company. So like, even, I mean, let's say like in an ideal world, if AEW eventually get their act together and they start hiring sort of competent writers and things like that, like it doesn't really matter how big they get. Like they could, even if they kind of outgrow WWE as the wrestling company, like the number one wrestling company, they still don't have WrestleMania. And I think WrestleMania will always kind of keep WWE in the picture, so to speak. It just feels like there's a lot of work that any other company would need to do to rival anything of the height of WrestleMania. I think like the only thing, I was thinking about it earlier, the only thing that you could kind of compare it to is if you were, say, back in the 40s and 50s, I suppose you could never really imagine wrestling being anything other than the NWA. And then eventually, obviously, that became, that changed over the years. But I think WrestleMania is in a similar situation where you can't really imagine wrestling without WrestleMania these days,
Oh, absolutely, Danny. It's the crown jewel, and it's the one day of the year where wrestling is mainstream. You have a bunch of celebrities coming in, and you have a bunch of names making appearances from a time when wrestling was a lot more popular. So, this stage of our lives, I suppose it is hard for us to see to imagine wrestling without WrestleMania.
Yeah. It's just that they always just seem to manage to cobble together a decent sort of passable main event as well. Like, I know we've had some dud main events over the years, obviously, but like from a kind of marquee perspective, they always seem to put something together that kind of works. And I think as long as you can do that, I think there's always going to be that interest in the show overall, and then it gives everybody else a chance to kind of just showcase what they can do, because I imagine there's lots of fans like us that will be tuning back in for that one night. And certainly like new upcoming stars like Bianca Belair and Rhea Ripley and people like that, I think will gain that attention from the more sort of lapsed casual fans, which can only be a good thing at the end of the day, really.
Dan, are you a fan of dividing WrestleMania into two nights? Because as we were just talking about earlier, I mean, to us, WrestleMania is Wrestling Christmas. It is that one day of the year that is super special and where, wrestling is mainstream again. Does that effect sort of get diluted when you sort of split the card over 2 days?
Like instinctively, I want to say that I would prefer it to still be on one night, but to be fair, I remember last year sitting down on obviously the Saturday night to watch night one, and then thinking like getting quite excited by the fact that it wasn't over, and I still got to watch more WrestleMania the next day. That was pretty cool. So like, I don't know, as a rule, I think it should just be on the one night, but I think there are definitely benefits to it being over 2 nights. I don't know, do you agree? Or?
Yeah, I'm sort of with you. I just like having the card sort of split over 2 days, but you and I will watch WrestleMania regardless. But if you were a casual fan, and if you actually combine the two cards together, and if you look at it from that perspective, you have you have the main event, you have Banks, Belair, Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, and from that perspective, that card actually looks pretty decent and quite strong. But when you split it up over 2 days, then I think the pickings become a little bit more meager.
Yeah. There's definitely that sense that it's sort of spread too thin almost over the 2 nights, which takes away a little bit from the majesty of the show, I suppose. And also from a UK fan's perspective, it does really mess up your weekend, because it only used to be that one night that you'd have to stay up till 4 or 5 o'clock and then either sort of book work off the next day or just go in really tired. Whereas now it's kind of like the whole weekend's basically a write-off, which isn't the case for everybody, but I think British fans in particular will know what I'm talking about.
I mean, for us, we basically have to wake up pretty early in the morning to catch Mania, so it's not so bad, but you need to take a day off work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's a bit of a tradition for me when the new sort of annual leave sort of allowance comes out. I always just go straight for the day after WrestleMania, like, yeah, I need that off, because I'm not going to be good that day. So.
Do you remember when the Raw after WrestleMania was a thing? You needed to take 2 days off then.
Yeah, this is true. Thankfully, that kind of phenomenon happened when I was at university, so it didn't really matter too much. But yeah, if it happened these days, then yeah, I'd have to think about that. It's a bit of a shame that the Raw after WrestleMania is not really as big a thing as it used to be, because it's technically it's like 3 nights in a row. It could be potentially where you'd have really sort of interesting, compelling wrestling. I don't know whether it's going to be any different this year, but I definitely used to enjoy the post-Mania Raw episodes.
I mean, I suppose the one way you could look at it is that you sort of almost have like an entire week of like wrestling festivities because you start with NXT Takeover on the Wednesday and the Thursday, and then you get a little bit of respite on the Friday, and then you go into the Mania festivities on the weekend.
Yeah. And I think obviously pre-COVID, I think this week was really important for a lot of independent promotions as well, because a lot of places, they put shows on for that week. It's sort of in the same similar sort of location. A bit of a shame that that's had to be put on the wayside at the minute with COVID, but hopefully it can start up again when things sort of get back to sort of quote unquote normal.
So then, should we get started with the card? Is there anything that catches your eye?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess if we sort of start with what we would call like the lower card matches. I mean, I don't know if at this point we can necessarily speculate on what order everything's going to be in, but I mean, some of the minor matches on this show, I think there's a lot of stuff that we've kind of seen before. I mean, particularly Owens and Sami Zayn. I mean, okay, it might be a good match, and I think the dynamics of it have changed a little bit, because it normally, we were so used to seeing Owens as the heel and Zayn as the sort of underdog babyface, and obviously that's very different now. But I struggle to get excited about a match that I've seen so many times before. And I think similarly with things like Cesaro and Rollins and Big E and Apollo, it's just, I think I'm probably going to enjoy them as I'm sitting through them, but it's definitely not something I'm necessarily tuning in for. How about you? Is there anything that sort of piques your attention at this point?
I think, like we were talking about earlier, Dan, some of these matches, like Owens versus Zayn or Cesaro versus Rollins, they're a nice value add if you're going to watch the card for another marquee match, but they're not capable of sort of carrying the card on its own, which they're sort of being asked to do at the moment. So that's a bit unfortunate for those programs. So with regard to the Kevin Owens versus Sami Zayn match, it looks like Vince McMahon is banking on Logan Paul to sort of carry the interest for that match. He's expected to be involved in the WrestleMania match in some capacity. So Logan Paul, of course, is the the YouTube personality who's expected to have a fight with Floyd Mayweather, a boxing match with Floyd Mayweather, rather.
Oh, I see. I'm very glad you said that, because I didn't quite know what you were talking about. This is showing my just shows like how little attention I'm paying to most sort of these sort of the fight scene, I guess. So what's the story?
No, I mean Logan Paul is a popular YouTuber, but he appeals to a demographic which is probably 15 years younger than we are.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
So, I mean, if he had been attached to Floyd Mayweather, I would have had no idea who he was either.
But I think, like as a rule, I think celebrity involvement in Mania is always really important. And I think if you look back at some of the bigger shows in the sort of the early years, you'd have, I think it was at WrestleMania 3, you had Alice Cooper and various other people involved, and it certainly doesn't hurt. I mean, if you don't involve them too much, it's definitely a bit of a boost for wrestling. Because I suppose at the minute you definitely can't call professional wrestling mainstream, but there are still avenues that they can take where they can gain a bit of mainstream attention. So whoever this Logan Paul guy is, I'm sure that he will add some kind of value to everything. So
yeah, hopefully he does. Hopefully he can give Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn the boost they deserve.
So is he more aligned with Owens or Zayn? Like, where is he going to come into it with the dynamics of the match?
I mean, he's aligned with Zayn at the moment, I believe, because he's meant to be the producer of Zayn's documentary or whatever.
Okay.
So he's making his first appearance on SmackDown this coming week. So we'll get a better idea of what he's going to do.
Okay, that's fair enough. I mean, I am liking the Sami Zayn character, actually. This is the best incarnation of the Zayn character we've had since he made his debut on WWE. I didn't really know much about him in the sort of the previous promotions. Like El Generico was a character I'd kind of heard of, but I guess from what I hear, he's not too different to the Sami Zayn character. It's just he doesn't wear the mask again, obviously. But he's tapped into something for me, I think. This sort of paranoid, kind of power crazy, sort of quasi Cuban dictator type role he's playing. I think it's really entertaining. So I kind of hope that he gets the win here, or at least gets some of the like most of the attention, I guess, going forward.
I think for Zayn, unfortunately, he's on the same show as Roman Reigns, who's also doing a phenomenal job. Because I think this version of Zayn actually has main event potential. If if they could get him on Raw, I don't see any reason why he shouldn't be involved in like the WWE title picture.
Yeah, I mean, like he's a character that. I mean, coming from the generation of wrestling that I grew up with, I really like the characters that wrestling used to have, and those sorts of guys would normally find themselves in, if not the main event, then certainly in kind of big, high-profile matches against sort of bigger opponents. So, and I think we're expecting some kind of either a screwy finish or Zayn to kind of eke out a win. Through kind of nefarious means or whatever. And again, I think that's something that WrestleMania needs, because it separates wrestling from other forms of combat sport. I don't think wrestling should be another version of UFC. I think it's got its own place amongst the fan base, and I think Zayn is at the minute a really crucial part in that overall. So yeah, I guess kind of as we're talking about it more, I'm maybe looking forward to this more than I expected to be, almost. And like I say, it's going to be very different, I think, from some of the other Zayn versus Owens matches we've seen in the past.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a completely different dynamic than anything they've ever done before, I suppose. So it is interesting in that sense.
Yeah. Do you suspect like any match that would kind of open nights 1 and 2, because it can be quite difficult in theory to open a WrestleMania, because it has to be something that catches your attention and kind of just puts you in that sort of mind frames for the show to carry on. So I mean, normally we would, recent years we've had Andre the Giant Battle Royals and things like that, which obviously we're not going to get this time around. So do you think they could even open with this one?
So Dan, so I read something about them not wanting to do like a kickoff show match on the first night because they wanted the first live entrance to be a big deal. And since, I mean, not to spoil anything that's coming up later on, but since you and I both believe that Sasha Banks and Bianca Belair should main event the first night, it's probably a good idea to start off with Drew McIntyre versus Bobby Lashley. Drew McIntyre is a very popular babyface, so I think him making the first entrance could be a good idea. And like you said, on night 2, Kevin Owens versus Sami Zayn could fill the role of the hot opener.
Yeah, I'd not considered that actually before. I mean, this really is quite a sort of historic kind of monumental moment actually, with the first. The first match on the first night of WrestleMania with the fans in attendance. It's going to be a big deal, and obviously they'll want it to be a big deal. So yeah, you can't really start with I was going to say a half-empty stadium, but it's probably going to be half-empty anyway. But you know what I mean, like like the things we used to see where you'd still see people coming into the stadium as, I don't know, Tyler Breeze was taking on Zack Ryder or something. Yeah, you don't want to start your WrestleMania in that way, considering the circumstances. So.
No, you definitely don't want to start your WrestleMania under those circumstances. So Dan, I just wanted to ask you, what have you made of the build to Braun Strowman versus Shane McMahon so far?
I'll be honest, I haven't really seen that much of it. I know that it's kind of got a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek feel from what I hear, but I don't know, maybe you're better positioned to talk about that than I am.
So it's basically sort of meant to sort of make you want to see Braun Strowman just like rip Shane McMahon apart limb from limb, because Shane McMahon is cutting these like monotonous heel promos, and he's trying to bully Braun Strowman basically by making fun of his intellect and whatever else. But I don't know. All it makes me want is to see Shane McMahon beat Braun Strowman, because I don't have any sympathy for Braun Strowman.
Well, I think this feeds into a wider issue around having fans in attendance, because obviously the company have had more control over the kinds of narratives they can tell with the fans not being there, or at least obviously not in person. And I think there's going to be maybe a few occasions where what they're intending to go for in a few matches are going to be subverted by how the crowd are going to respond. So I imagine there will be quite a few people like yourself that will be siding with Shane, just because, you know, Braun Strowman isn't really a character that you would normally associate with kind of getting sympathetic babyface like reactions. So that could be a problem for this match, actually.
Right. Dan, just another thing. What has been your take on Randy Orton versus The Fiend?
So this is, like I say, I do like the character elements of wrestling, and obviously The Fiend for me is one of the best characters they've put out for a long time. It's really difficult to kind of tread the line, though, because I mean there's definitely like callbacks to the Orton and Wyatt feud back from was it 33 or 32? They had that match with the cockroaches and everything.
I believe it was 33.
Yeah. So they've definitely they've got the potential to kind of step over the line in terms of like the dramatics and the sort of special effects and everything. But I think I'm really looking forward to the match, because I kind of expect it to be similar in a way to the Firefly Funhouse match that we had last time. And I think especially with that history of Orton and Wyatt together, I think that could be really really engaging. Because obviously, you know, part of the Funhouse match last time was the fact that, you know, Cena kind of took the wind out of Wyatt's sails at WrestleMania 30, and again Orton kind of did the same thing to him at 33 when he beat him for the title. So there's definitely a story to tell here. I think Alexa Bliss's involvement has been brilliant, actually. I mean, you know, it's cheesy and over the top, but it's kind of what I want as a wrestling fan. It's just something different from the kind of, you know, one guy versus one guy for a title dynamic that we normally get. So I'm overall quite positive about it, I suppose. What do you think?
So I'm almost 180 from your position, because I mean I also enjoy the character side of things, but I think the Fiend is a bit too out there for me, and that combined with the fact that he doesn't sell for anyone and he can never be beaten and is invincible, is just a total turn off. And I also think that the Fiend has never gotten his look right. I think he looks I just can't take him seriously. With the new look that he's got after being subject to third degree burns by Randy Orton. As you said, I think Alexa Bliss's character work has been pretty decent, but I think she's the only saving grace in this program for me. Knowing WWE, they're probably likely to sort of set the Fiend up for main event program after he beats Randy Orton, and that's not something I'm looking forward to right now.
Yeah, it kind of surprises me, actually. I mean, I know, like, the Fiend is a bit of a divisive character generally. I think what's kind of carrying him through is generally just the appreciation from fans that WWE were trying something that is against the norm, which they don't do enough of these days. And obviously with the writing team they have, I mean, you know, things go too far and it does get too over the line with the cheesiness of it, I guess. But I still, as a fan, kind of appreciate what they're trying to do at least. It's one of the things. I mean, I generally tend to agree with Jim Cornette on most things, but his views on the Fiend are definitely not positive. He's quite direct in his sort of criticism of what they're doing with him. I think he's started to refuse to watch any of the matches anyway. So, but I don't know. Like it has the potential to be something. I think a lot of people were a bit concerned about what the Cena match was going to be like last time. But I think if we get anything close to that level of greatness, and I think it's definitely going to be an asset to the card overall. But
can you pull off a John Cena match type of thing with a live audience?
Probably not. I mean, if they were going to do that, they would have to just play a kind of pre-taped cinematic match on the screen, which probably might not go down that well, actually. But I would still prefer that to them doing some kind of a straight-up in-ring match, personally. Because I think we have seen it a lot of times. And, you know, as much as I like the Fiend character, I think the weakest part of Bray Wyatt overall is his in-ring work. I mean, he's okay, but he's kind of, I think his character and his promo work kind of demands a bit more than actually what we get from a match. So it probably won't be as kind of cinematic as the Cena match. I think there probably will be some wrestling involved, but I think they should kind of be going in that direction rather than just, you know, a sort of replay of the 33 Mania match anyway.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. They have to strike that balance with the crowd and attendance, I think. But I think WWE is going to be lazy and give us a bunch of cockroaches being projected on the mat.
Yeah, I expect somebody to be set on fire again, and you know, it could be all sorts of different dramatic. Maybe they can borrow an idea from AEW on how to explode a ring. You know. Get that pyro team in, everything will be fine, you know. And I like, sometimes like Vince McMahon likes to poke fun at his competition, so maybe this is quite a good opportunity to you know, sort of call to that moment in AEW. Maybe sort of have the match end with a ring explosion, but kind of in a way that it actually looks like it would, you know, cause any particular type of harm to the people inside. Which is not something we got from the Moxley Omega match anyway.
But you know, Kenny Omega, knowing you know, the artist that he is, he probably wanted to actually set Dean Ambrose on fire. The pyrotechnics of that week.
Yeah, well, we're only 20 minutes in and we're already bashing AEW. It's supposed to be a Mania special, but you know, we can't resist ourselves, I think. I think, you know, either way, I think, you know, they need to right some of the wrongs that have been done to the Wyatt character in the past, and I think he needs to come out with a win here. Everything seems to be kind of tailored towards that. What are you kind of making of the dynamics? Like, do you see the Fiend as more of the babyface in this?
I really don't know who to see as the babyface in all of this. I certainly can't see the demonic hellspawn guy who's manipulating an innocent woman as the babyface in this story. Yeah,
exactly. I think it will probably go a long way to how the fans react, I suppose, because it's one of them that there's not necessarily that clear-cut face and heel dynamic, and that's fine for some matches. You don't always have to have that. But yeah, because I know, you know, Orton has pretty much been one of the main heels through the company for the last sort of year, and there's nothing obvious to indicate that he's turned babyface as a result of all this. So, you know, and he did literally set a man on fire. So, you know, neither is really a candidate for you know, sort of babyface hero for this. You know.
Dan, I just want to ask you: do you think there is a chance that the fans just, you know, sort of take a WrestleMania 20 Goldberg versus Brock Lesnar approach to this match, where they just like put these guys out of the building?
No, I mean, I certainly hope not. I don't think anything could replicate the dynamics of that Lesnar and Goldberg match. You know, it's like, obviously everybody knew that both men were leaving the company anyway. It seemed to take them an age to even lock up. You know, I don't think it, like, for me, that's probably the worst WrestleMania match of all time. The only exception to that would be Undertaker versus Lesnar at 30, for obvious reasons. But yeah, I don't think anything's going to get that bad again, hopefully. Fingers crossed. Yeah.
I mean, I honestly think in his Fiend persona, Bray Wyatt isn't that much better of a worker than Bill Goldberg.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, he isn't, and I think he's had some good matches over the years with the right partner. I think, you know, his match at the Royal Rumble against Bryan a few years ago was obviously very good, but that was probably more to do with the Bryan than with Wyatt. But you know, that's obviously not where his strengths lie, and that's okay. You know, his promo work, when he's got a little bit of structure to it, is very good. He's obviously got a very creative brain, and I think he kind of understands wrestling to an extent. I think he sort of tries to merge it with other forms of entertainment as well. Like, you know, I think a lot of the Fiend stuff appeals to people who are really into the sort of the Marvel comics and the Marvel universe, which isn't something I would associate myself with at all. But again, I kind of appreciate what he's trying to do, even though at times it doesn't quite come off.
Yeah, there's just too much of a disconnect between him and the rest of that universe. No pun intended at times.
Yeah. I mean, there were previous times in wrestling where this probably would have worked better, although I don't know. I can't really see the Fiend working in the 80s Hogan era. I think he was just probably too dark for that. Attitude era, I don't know. I think he kind of would have had a place, but he certainly wouldn't have been as high up on the card as he is now. I think he would probably be, the sort of, I don't know, like the kind of Val Venus and Godfather territory, like, popular for what it is, but certainly not anything to do with the sort of the main events of, Rock and Austin and Triple H.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Maybe that would have been better for him in a way, because I think this is a little bit too high up on the card for the Fiend personally. But maybe the Fiend would be a great fit with AEW.
Yeah, but then you would have to rely on the production team and the pyro team to like make him look half decent. And if there's one thing that WWE definitely has over AEW, it's the production work. So I don't think he's going to work anywhere else other than WWE. Although,
you don't think Kenny Omega would put in a fantastic balletic performance with the Fiend?
I was going to say, as long as I could see Kenny Omega being set on fire, I'll be a happy man. So. Although if it's Kenny Omega, it would probably be like some kind of... You'd probably counter it with a fireball, like a Dragon Ball Z laser shot or something stupid like that,
Oh my goodness, I can already see it in my head. The Fiend is breathing fire and Kenny Omega shooting a fucking Kamehameha wave out of his hands.
Can you imagine Bray Wyatt and Kenny Omega getting together and planning a match? I just think it would be the most ludicrous thing we've ever seen. It probably would be the death of the wrestling industry overall. Let's hope we never get there.
I think a Bray Wyatt Kenny Omega match would have a lot more in common with a cheap Michael Bay movie than...
Yeah, they probably just give wrestling in and just decide to write a comic book together. That's probably the best way. Well, so yeah, I'm not looking forward to this match. I hope it delivers to the close to the extent that the last 5-5 Funhouse match did, but it's a different sort of situation now with the fans back in attendance. So I don't quite know what we're going to get, but I'm intrigued enough to obviously be looking forward to it to an extent. But
Fair enough. So anything else on the card that's got your fancy?
Well, I mean, again, not following things too closely, but I know that because I watched the Royal Rumble, I know that Bad Bunny's got himself involved in the WWE, and he's somehow got himself a match against The Miz. Now, again, this is one of those situations where it's high profile. Apparently, I didn't know who Bad Bunny was, but apparently he's quite a big star for a lot of people. Again, probably people a lot younger than us, but it's bringing somebody into the fold that's going to grab attention, and he can certainly, I don't know how much kind of training and stuff he's had or sort of preparation, but he seemed to do quite a good sort of leap off the top rope for the Rumble, so the match might not be so bad. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Dan, I agree with you. I don't think Bad Bunny's done a bad job of this at all. I think he's actually sort of integrated himself decently into the program, so I think there is certainly the potential for this match to be quite decent.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you never, as long as you don't sort of violate the David Arquette rule and have celebrities win sort of major titles, I think it's fine to involve them in Mania shows. And obviously he'll have Damian Priest in his corner, so I'm guessing that he'll probably get involved in some way as well. And to be honest, in the long term, this is probably a really good platform for somebody like Damian Priest, because the guy's for me anyway. The guy's got star written all over him, and I think if they handle him properly, put him in these situations where enough eyeballs are on him, I think this could do wonders for him going forward. So probably, you know, out of anything, I think Priest is probably going to be the breakout star of this match.
I agree with you, and I hope they capitalize on this momentum because I worry because Priest is in his late 30s, and Vince McMahon isn't really prone to pushing people that age profile. So I just hope so he can sort of come out with some sort of momentum that he can carry into the next year.
Yeah. I mean, you know, in an ideal world, you would have these sort of younger, sort of early 20s stars like coming through the ranks and sort of building for the future. But, you know, we've kind of got to take what we've got at the minute. And I think if they could get, you know, 5, 6, 7 years out of Priest at like a higher level, I think that would be quite a good contribution to the product overall. I haven't seen a lot of his work really sort of in ring, but he strikes me as the kind of character that doesn't necessarily need to do a lot. There's definitely some similarities, I think, with him and Reigns, where I think his character overall is going to be the main selling point. Although from what I've seen, I know he's got a slightly sort of better in ring. You know, there's more about him in ring wise than there is, you know, with Reigns. But I think, you know, overall, if we're looking at potential sort of future superstars from this card, I think Damian Priest is probably one to watch.
Oh yes, yeah, quite possibly. He is a very talented guy, but I think the only thing that could hold him back is his age because of Vince McMahon's biases.
Yeah. What kind of match are you expecting from this, though? Do you think it's going to go long? Do you think there's going to be because as far as I know, it's not a no DQ sort of tables match or anything like that. It's just a straight up match, I think, is it?
No, I don't think it's going to be very long at all. I think it's going to be about a 10-minute sort of skirmish. Morrison and Bad Bunny get involved in the finish, and Priest and Bad Bunny sort of just lay Miz and Morrison out at the end of the match, in a brief sort of post-match brawl.
Yeah. And I think again, it probably will be. It will show the Miz's overall contribution to wrestling. Like fans seem to be going a bit back and forth with the Miz. There's times when he's very popular and people recognise his contribution to everything, and then I think occasionally people will go off him and kind of question why he's there. But I think it was a couple of years ago. I'm sure it was the WrestleMania 35 card where it was him and Shane McMahon in the Last Man Standing or Street Fight or something. And that was one match that I didn't expect anything from, but it turned out to be one of the best things on the card. So I think if they can replicate something like that, I think this would be a really good addition to the show.
But I think you can't underestimate the value of having the Miz's father involved in that match because his performance was so special and added another layer of emotion to that match.
Yeah. And the dynamics were different. Obviously, Miz was going in as the babyface for that one. I just think it worked really well. And again, I know Miz's character is based on this guy who thinks he's a bigger kind of Hollywood, breakout star than he actually is. But I imagine he's probably got some name recognition in other forms of entertainment, so kind of makes sense to put him with Bad Bunny here.
I suppose. And the Miz is very versatile. He can sort of play off almost anybody as well, and he's fantastic on the mic, so that helps.
Yeah. It's this would go well as a kind of personally, I would kind of have this match and then maybe a bit of a palate cleanser and then go into the main event, because I think the crowd are probably going to be quite up for this one considering who's involved. So I definitely want to see this kind of push later into the night. Or I guess you could maybe make a candidate. You could make your case for this opening one of the nights, actually, because the crowd are definitely going to be into it. So why not just kick off the whole thing with, Miz and Bad Bunny?
Yeah, certainly. If the WWE audience is into Bad Bunny, that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think it would set things up quite nicely. Actually, I feel sorry for whoever has to follow this one, actually, because I think the crowd are going to be a little bit flat following it. But the WWE are generally quite good at structuring their cards. I think they do a lot better than AEW and New Japan. I think those two companies tend to just kind of rank things in order of importance. So they'll have like the semi-main events going into the main event, and I think by the end of it, the crowd have just kind of had enough of these sort of long, drawn-out, quote unquote 5-star classics. I think the WWE are quite good at just knowing where to put matches, and I hope that continues in this year's WrestleMania.
Yeah, I agreed, and I think the spacing here is going to be pivotal. But I think it's also going to be a bit tricky here because you haven't had a crowd in so long. You don't know how people are going to react to which character.
Yeah, there's probably quite a few people backstage that are dreading this actually, because the freedom that they've had to kind of tell their own story, I think, isn't something they've had for a long time. So yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see anyway.
If I were somebody involved in creative at WWE, my ultimate nightmare is that I have spent an entire year building Roman Reigns as a heel, and I've got Daniel Bryan here to take the belt off of him. And the minute he walks out, those fans cheer Roman Reigns like he's the second coming of Stone Cold Steve Austin. If that happens, I am shitting myself because I know Vince McMahon is going to kill me. Because they canvassed him for about 6 months to get him to turn Reigns heel.
Yeah. There's definitely that danger, but then, the obvious comparison to that would be The Rock in the sort of late 90s, because he was obviously pushed as this babyface that nobody wanted, and then, roundly booed, and that slowly transitioned him to being a heel. And then he turned out to be one of the most sort of celebrated babyface stars of all time. So the same could potentially happen with Reigns, but it's really difficult because you want to retain the character, but
I think it's inevitable that it will happen at some point. I'm just hoping it doesn't happen yet.
Yeah, and obviously they need to be really careful not to just revert back to the original Roman Reigns character, because people are obviously going to see through that straight away. So you kind of have to retain the sort of badass tribal chief character, but in a more of a babyface perspective, which I don't think is going to be easy.
I think you should do everything possible to hold on to Paul Heyman with Reigns. I think even when he's a babyface, he should still be attached to Paul Heyman, because I think that would work.
Yeah. I think I mean, obviously we'll talk about this match a bit more in a minute, but in terms of that issue with crowds being back in attendance and how they're going to react, I think this is probably one of the matches that's going to be a big kind of indication of where things are going to go over the next few years. I mean, I'm hoping that fans have just bought into the heel character enough where he does get the appropriate reaction for his character. And obviously with Edge and Daniel Bryan being two of the most sort of celebrated babyface stars you have at the moment, I think that's going to help. Because if this was like Roman Reigns versus Bobby Lashley, for example, I think the crowd would quickly turn on Lashley and go for Reigns, whereas I think Edge and Daniel Bryan are very different in that sense. So maybe that's part of the reason why Daniel Bryan was inserted into this. I don't know, but it might help.
No, I think Daniel Bryan is the clear babyface in this match, because Edge is at best a tweener here after his antics on the most recent SmackDown.
Again, yeah, like fill me in. What happened, because I haven't really been watching.
I mean, Edge almost just basically went heel. I mean, he almost concertoed Daniel Bryan. He assaulted everybody with a steel chair. Mm-hmm. He laid out the referees and the officials and everything. So yeah, I mean, Daniel Bryan is the only real babyface in this match at the moment.
But like, was there an appetite for that? Because again, it's hard to tell with fans not being in attendance, but just the general feel from fans and on the internet and social media and everything, are they doing this because people are turning against Edge, like in a similar way that Batista in WrestleMania 30 or what?
No, I just think that there was a feeling that the main event was a little bit flat. So I think adding Daniel Bryan has spiced it up a little bit, but no, there definitely wasn't any resentment toward Edge or anything like that.
Yeah. Because, I mean, yeah, like hearing you say that, it does recall memories from the WrestleMania 30 build-up, but that was forced by how poorly, obviously, Batista was accepted. And obviously, Edge isn't Batista. And I can't imagine there being many fans that would, sort of get tired of Edge like this soon, because coming back to win the Royal Rumble, I think was met with relatively sort of universal acclaim, and people tended to go with it. So like I don't know. I mean, hearing that Brian has been inserted into this kind of confused me a little bit, and it's kind of, I don't know if we're gonna maybe disagree on this point, but it's kind of taken away something from what I was looking forward to with just a straight up Reigns versus Edge match. I think, like personally, I don't really think Brian has any business being in this. But I know you're a big Daniel Bryan mark, so I don't know whether you agree with that.
Again, I mean, neither of us particularly followed SmackDown all that closely, but I think before the Royal Rumble, Daniel Bryan and Roman Reigns had been kept apart sufficiently, and there was an appetite for those two to face each other in the main event of WrestleMania, and Edge winning the Royal Rumble, I certainly felt like it came out of left field because I was staying away from the spoilers and everything. Um, so to me, I don't know. So I mean, to me, Daniel Bryan being in the main event does feel does feel warranted, really.
Yeah, I mean, I guess thinking that, I mean, we were chatting briefly earlier about the other title match, McIntyre versus Lashley, and maybe it just would have made more sense if you were going to have Edge win the Rumble, just for Edge to go after McIntyre, and then for Reigns and Bryan to do the SmackDown one. That would have kept things more simple than I think they have done. I think I would probably be more excited for that than I think what we've got anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to complain about Daniel Bryan being in the main event of WrestleMania in any capacity, but what you've outlined certainly would have been better, more ideal anyway.
Yeah, and maybe there's opportunity to maybe speak about the other title match, because obviously we've got McIntyre and Lashley, but again, I think some of the dynamics of this have been a little bit screwed up because McIntyre's obviously going in as the challenger. Lashley kind of got the title in a little bit of a roundabout way. Obviously, we had to go through Miz's cash in, and then the things that happened after that. I think it's completely undermined the Money in the Bank concept for me. Initially it was won by Otis, and then they had this stupid court case thing where Miz ended up getting it, and then sort of cashed in and lost it the next week on Raw. So I don't know what they were thinking with the Money in the Bank angle this year. But I just would have preferred for Drew to just held the title all year, just go in as the champion and have Lashley as a kind of worthy contender. And I think Lashley's potential kind of coronation of winning the title at Mania against established Drew McIntyre again would have been a better story, and I think one that I think the fans would have reacted to quite well as well. So they've kind of complicated things too much, and it's taken away from some of the anticipation that I've had around this one. I don't know. What are your thoughts around sort of Lashley McIntyre?
Very similar because very similar. I don't think like as you said, Dan, I think Bobby Lashley is the best alternative left right now, but I think they should have, if they wanted Drew McIntyre to chase the belt going into WrestleMania, they should have thought it out long in advance, and they should have laid it out in such a manner that he was chasing Randy Orton for the title, not exchanging the belt with him at like a meaningless point of the calendar. Because while I'm not excited for his Fiend program, I think Orton's heel work throughout the year has been exceptional, and I think it should have been rewarded with a title match at WrestleMania. But that being said, I think that being said, I think MVP's mic work has been phenomenal, and I think he's an excellent manager, and I think he has the potential to make many heels on the roster. And Bobby Lashley is very fortunate that he gets to work with MVP. Yeah,
that definitely helps. And I guess sort of in theory, I don't necessarily have an issue with Lesnar. Sorry, that's wishful thinking. Bobby Lashley being in this position. I think there probably would have been better alternatives, like you say. I think if they'd have done the Randy Orton and Drew McIntyre feud around this time, it probably would have been a bit more compelling. And I think again, deserved of his heel work this year. But I mean, if you were to say, obviously a year ago we saw McIntyre win the title off Lesnar. How would you rate his year so far? Is he kind of in a position that you expected him to be in, or do you think he's kind of not lived up to some of the expectation?
No, I think he's been a strong babyface, but I think again he suffered because of the lack of a crowd. I think the crowd would have accepted him with open arms when he pinned Brock Lesnar at last year's WrestleMania, and I think he would have done well. Again, there's always the possibility that they would have turned on him, being the fickle fan base that this is. But yeah, no, I think he's done quite well. Obviously, other than Randy Orton, there has been a shortage of opponents for him to work with. So I think it is a credit to him that he has been able to work down the card, so to speak.
Yeah, I think I had quite a lot of promise sort of when last year's Rumble was obviously a big moment for him, and then it was pretty much guaranteed at that point that he was going to take the title off Lesnar, and that was very exciting just to see this new star being created. I think as time's gone on, I think I'm questioning a little bit where the kind of appeal is. I think he has the potential to be quite a bland character. I think he's probably reaching like the upper limits of his potential at the moment, but I don't really see him taking that next step into sort of mega stardom. I think, and especially with the work that Reigns is doing at the minute, I think Drew will always be seen as the sort of the understudy number 2 type guy to Reigns' run. I don't know, but I think the best thing they could have done with McIntyre was just to kind of keep him as this very strong babyface champion. Because I know he lost the title in a run up to Survivor Series and then won it straight back, and then obviously was Miz cashed in on him and he lost the title again. I just think if it would have been better just to keep him on that sort of more of a kind of a steady kind of at the top babyface champion with the title, and have these sort of various challenges come after him. And I think that maybe would have told a better story for this title match at Mania, because I think by now people would have had the appetite to see the title on somebody else. And I think Lashley is still quite popular generally, and I think he's doing some very good work with MVP. So yeah, I think Lashley winning the title off Drew for this night would have just worked so much better. But again, it's complicating things more than they need to be, and I think that sort of let them down a little bit.
But do you think there would have been any challengers who he could have turned away at WrestleMania? Anybody, any sort of credible threat who could have worked with him on the Raw roster?
No, I mean I'm struggling to think of anyone, but I guess he, the no fans being in attendance is a little bit of a blessing and a curse, because you could have maybe it wouldn't have been so bad to have these sort of various opponents go after him, and then even if it isn't the most compelling wrestling ever, it's still you could put it down to the fact that we're in COVID times and there's not that sort of crowd involvement in everything. But I think it just, considering that fans are going to be coming back for this WrestleMania, I think the Drew character would have had a better response from people if he was this seemingly kind of unbeatable babyface champion, and I know WWE always like to do that, going back to the days of Hogan and everything, and San Martino, like having this sort of long established person who holds the belt, and it's all, it gets to the point where it's like a little bit of a shock to see them lose, and I think that's probably what they should have done really with him. And it's certainly, it's not it's not Drew's fault that there aren't worthy competitors to face him, but I certainly think Lashley's probably the best thing you could do at the minute.
Right. Maybe the guy who, again, it could have been was Orton. Maybe you keep those guys apart for long enough, and then at WrestleMania he's the credible challenger.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much agreed on that. I think this WrestleMania probably needed a good Randy Orton Drew McIntyre match, but we've just seen it so many times it's obviously become very diluted. Do you think this match is going to deliver? Do you think Lashley and McIntyre together are going to put on a good show?
No, I think it's going to be a bit of a letdown. I don't think these guys are going to be able to work at a quick enough pace for it to be compelling. And the problem is, I think the result's been telegraphed so far in advance that there isn't really going to be any drama around McIntyre winning the title, I don't think.
Yeah. I think, again, if the dynamics would have been different, and I think if McIntyre was going in as the champion, you probably could have done something quite interesting. So, you could have had a sort of Goldberg-style squash match where Lashley just takes him unaware and just defeats him in a matter of seconds. And I think that would have been really good because, again, if he had been this long reigning champion and beaten off so many opponents and then to lose in that fashion is always a good story. And I think it would have set Lashley up for a really good title reign as well. Whereas I suspect what they're going to go with is Drew being the sort of the babyface fighting from underneath and eventually winning the title, and I think that's just going to fall flat personally. So, you know,
yeah, that's what I think so too. He's certainly going to be the babyface fighting from underneath. Whenever it looks like he's getting the upper hand, it's going to be MVP pegging him back, and I just don't see them being able to build any sort of drama in this match.
I think the only way that could have worked is if they would have held WrestleMania in the UK, but it's not going to happen in America.
But is he that popular in the UK, Drew McIntyre?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, wrestling it has become a little bit of a niche thing over here. It's not generally talked about, but I do occasionally see some Drew McIntyre sort of t-shirts and things around. So I think we just appreciate when somebody like that is pushed because, you know, we don't get that many main event UK stars, and I think it's quite a, you know, it's quite exciting to see him. And I know that when he left WWE, he did a lot of the independent circuits in the UK, and I think he gained a lot of respect from the sort of the underground fan base. So I think, you know, Wembley Stadium or maybe even somewhere in Scotland, this probably would have been like Drew McIntyre's night, if anything. But hey ho, you know, for some reason we still haven't got a WrestleMania over here, and you know, it's just been far too long now. I hope they do it eventually, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, especially after this pandemic, I think the UK fans will be more than happy to see like a stadium wrestling show come their way.
Yeah. But I know they've announced the locations of the next 2 or 3 Manias now, and obviously London isn't on them, so we're gonna have a bit of a wait, I think.
So Dan, we know that Asuka is one of the best wrestlers on the roster, irrespective of gender, and you know, ever since Becky Lynch's pregnancy, she's been you know, on a pretty decent run. And she finds herself in a title defense against Rhea Ripley. How do you expect this to pan out?
I'm looking forward to this one. I think it, similar to the male roster, I think there's some noticeable names that aren't going to be on this card for the women as well. Like, you know, no Becky Lynch, obviously, and no Charlotte Flair. So it's kind of left to these other guys that I think have been a bit overlooked, and I think that's indicative of Asuka's title reign, because I think she's held that belt for quite a long time, but it's been generally quite an unremarkable title reign, which isn't the kind of treatment that she should be getting, because like you say, she is probably one of the best workers on the roster in general, and I've always liked her character, and I think Rhea Ripley is a worthy opponent for her, and I think it will be a very good match. I suspect Ripley to get the win, just to maybe right some of the wrongs of last year's show. So I'm looking forward to this one. I think it's definitely going to be one of the more sort of positive things on, you know, whichever night it's on. I still think, you know, it's still playing second fiddle to the Banks and Belair match, but that's just kind of how Asuka's been treated really from, you know, by the company. So yeah, I'm positively looking forward to this one. How about yourself?
Yeah, definitely looking forward to the match. I mean, there are actually rumors that there's a chance that Charlotte might be added to it, so I'm curious to see how that pans out. But as you said, I think Rhea Ripley winning the title could add a sort of shot in the arm to that Raw Women's division.
Are you more clued up on what the Charlotte Flair situation is? Because I've kind of heard bits and pieces, but it kind of took me by surprise, the fact that she was being sort of taken off the Mania card. I mean, what's going on with her?
I think there's a suspicion that she might have been pregnant, but I don't believe that she is. So I don't know. So I think maybe there is a chance that she's still added to the WrestleMania card. So that's what the confusion is about.
Oh, okay,
Okay.
because
I'm not sure about the technical details, but yeah.
but I don't know. I mean, like Charlotte already has this reputation of being just sort of planted into a match that she has no business being in. So I think if they do that again with Oscar and Rhea Ripley, I just think it's gonna. I mean, like Charlotte's another one that I'm really looking forward to seeing how the fans respond to her, because I think there is some Charlotte Flair fatigue setting in with a lot of people, and maybe Vince is slightly concerned about that because obviously in his eyes she's the sort of the centerpiece of this women's evolution story. So it could be interesting to see how she, what the response is to her. But personally, I don't want to see her. I'm not, I don't think it's going to be a shame at all if she isn't on this main card, because I think we could all do with a bit of a break from her personally. So I hope they just keep it as a one-on-one Oscar and Ripley.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think that'd be very dynamic anyway. And you can't have too many triple threat matches on the card as well. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's another point. No Shayna Baszler. Is she injured or is she fallen out of favour or what's?
um, is she in the women's tag match?
Is there a women's tag match? I don't know. Potentially, yeah. Is she still tag team champion?
Well, yeah, you're right. There is no Shayna Baszler on the card. Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought so. Last I checked, she was the women's tag team champion with Nia Jax.
Yeah.
Yeah, she is. She is one half of the women's tag team champion. So I expect she will be added to. She will be added to the card probably this week. So.
Yeah, because it doesn't really. There's only two women's matches. As I think, as things stand anyway, there's only two women's matches over the two nights, which is a bit of a shame considering the amount of work they've put into the women's division. Obviously, Alexa Bliss is going to be involved in the Fiend match, but there's still obviously names like the icon. I know they're not together anymore, but the two girls in the Iconics are quite good. I've enjoyed Billie Kay to an extent. I think she's sort of latched onto something that might be able to get her over as a bit of an unlikely star going forward. But yeah, there's stuff, Shayna Baszler is just one of those names that you associated with being quite an integral part of last year's show against Becky Lynch, and it just seems like she's a bit of an afterthought this year. And I think we probably could have done with a few more singles or tag team matches involving the women. But...
I don't think it's going to be much more than one of those deals where they just try to get everybody on the card for payday.
Yeah, some kind of like 8-woman tag match or something. Yeah.
I mean, it is disappointing that they haven't capitalized on her skill set because she was used so well in NXT. But maybe if she gets a great reaction from the crowd, that could just always elevate her estimation in Vince McMahon's eyes.
Yeah, I mean, for me that would really work for someone like Baszler. The kind of like maybe if they do put a women's tag match on the card lower down, people would just suspect that she wouldn't make any more appearances. But then if you kind of brought her out at the end of one of the two women's title matches and just see how the crowd went with that, then that could be a good indication of maybe what to do with her sort of going forward. I think it would be quite good for her to come out as a bit of a sort of a shock appearance. Because I don't know. I mean, you have Ripley beat Oscar in this sort of long drawn out match. It's very physical and very physically demanding, and then just have Baszler come out and take out Ripley, and then you could launch into a Rhea Ripley and Shayna Baszler feud for the Raw Women's title.
Yeah, absolutely. That could you could absolutely set off a hot program right off the bat because both these women have potential.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think the two women's matches last time did deliver quite well. I think Baszler, it was Baszler and Becky, wasn't it? And it was Rhea Ripley and Charlotte. Just going by memory.
Could you come again, Ben? I'm so sorry.
So I'm just trying to recall the two matches from last year's WrestleMania. I think it was Rhea Ripley and Charlotte, wasn't it, for the NXT, and then
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
Becky and Shayna Baszler for the Raw title.
yeah. And I thought the Charlotte and Rhea match delivered really well. I think that was one of the better matches on either of the two nights. And I hope for Rhea Ripley that she has a similar sort of performance this time round. So yeah, I think that could be a real asset to this. I kind of see it as maybe a bit of a like a night 2 semi-main event type affair, because I suspect that Banks and Belair are going to be either the main event or potentially the semi-main event for night 1. So yeah, it's important to kind of spread these two matches out.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've talked myself into Banks versus Belair headlining night 1 at this point.
Yeah, and I think there's a big appetite for that amongst the fan base, so I hope they do that.
Yeah, I'd be disappointed if they didn't.
Yeah.
Sasha Banks, ever since her separation from Bailey, she's been tremendous, and and Belair just has so much potential. What do you think about Bianca Belair?
I think she's got star written all over her. I think, yeah, I think she has massive amounts of potential. I mean, it's funny because when she started making a bit of a name for herself down on NXT, I didn't quite get it. I just kind of saw her as another one of these sort of middle of the pack stars that wouldn't kind of live up to the NXT potential when she got to the main roster. But she's surprised everybody. I mean, she's obviously one hell of an athlete, and her mic work is pretty good as well. So I think I'd even go as far as to say that it's somebody that they could build the women's division around going forward. And again, I just think she's another one, and this goes for Banks as well. I think she's just another one of these women that benefits when Charlotte Flair's not in the picture, because they just seem so determined to put all of the spotlight on Charlotte Flair and, involve her in these ridiculous storylines involving Ric Flair and certain other people. And I just think if you kind of keep things simple and just go with your best athletes and your best characters, I think that's when you get the most out of the women's division. So yeah, Belair I think is definitely someone to look for in the future. And this really should be the launching pad for that. I suspect she would get the win against Banks, but I'm not sure. I expect to see a title change in the Raw Championship match compared to the SmackDown one. Do you agree? Or
I kind of think we'll see changes in both of them. To be quite honest. I could quite easily see Sasha Banks sort of going all the way heel, because it's sort of been teased a little bit in this program. So I think there is a space for that.
Yeah, I suppose the only thing you could do if you wanted to keep the title on Sasha, you could, sort of turn Sasha fully heel, like you say, because occasionally there is more to gain from a loss than a win, depending on how it plays out. And if you really want to get the crowd behind Bianca Belair, then kind of maybe have Sasha win by underhand tactics, or just kind of put in the sort of valiant effort by Bianca Belair, but she doesn't quite get there, and then that gives you more of an opportunity to get behind her for next time.
Yeah, absolutely. That might actually be the best case, because then if you set Bianca Belair on a chase, and then by the time she wins, she's a massive star.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I don't think you have those same dynamics with the Oscar and Ripley match. So I think a straightforward title change for that makes more sense to me. And again, it's a little bit of freedom with night 1, because if this match does main event night 1, then kind of closing it on, because I suspect that most of the fans would want to see a title change, and it might leave a bit of a sour taste in the mouth if she doesn't win it. But then you still got night 2, so it's not like the end of WrestleMania, so to speak. Like, you want to kind of close out on a big momentous occasion, like Bryan winning the title off Reigns or whatever. But I think being the main event of night 1 kind of protects you a little bit from that. So yeah, they've got sort of license to do something creative or engaging or new, but
So on a scale of 1 to 10, how high is your excitement for WrestleMania?
I think at the minute probably around about a 7, but I suspect that will probably go up the closer we get to it. But that's really saying something, because there have been a hell of a lot of pay-per-views that I just haven't bothered with at all. I think the last one I watched pretty much all of was the Rumble, because again the Rumble is in that category of that wrestling show of the year that you can't quite miss. But I think the last pay-per-view, Fastlane, I just looked down the card and I thought there is literally not one match on there I want to see. Whereas it's very different this time around with Mania. Yeah, how about you?
Yeah, I'm the same. I think 7 is a bit high, but yeah, I'm certainly into this.
And I'm really interested to see what they do at the start, because again, it is a big moment. Like, fans coming back into attendance and it being in an arena when, you know, we've had sort of the Thunderdome for so long and empty arena matches, and it's just going to feel like a big deal. And WWE know how to put on a show even after all these years. So I don't know. I don't know if we know who's going to be singing America the Beautiful this year, but I think that's going to be one hell of a performance with everybody kind of cheering them on. So looking forward to that.
Oh yeah, no question, no question.
Let's just hope there's not a huge COVID outbreak in Florida afterwards. But
hopefully everybody's wearing masks.
yeah, hopefully. I don't mean, with AEW, they keep sort of cutting to the crowd, and there's like definitely a few people in there that, you know, think that, you know, the mask is some kind of chin strap or something. That's not quite how it works. It's supposed to cover your mouth and nose. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, any final thoughts on this, or do you think we've kind of got the most out of this card that we could have done?
Yeah, I think that's about it, and maybe we'll get together to wrap up WrestleMania.
Yeah. I think, you know, definitely some kind of review podcast is definitely in the offing. So yeah, look out for that. Yeah, let's hope we're hope we're talking about it positively rather than just saying, oh, you know, what a shit show that was. Okay, well, yeah, thanks very much, Shanira, and yeah, I hope you're doing well out there, and look forward to next time we speak.
Yeah. Take care, everybody, and stay safe.
Yeah. Okay, bye for now.
Take care.